This is a brand new exhibit that's only been up for 1 week, and we've just been putting on the finishing touches even after our opening a week ago. So everything is still a little bit unknown to many of us, and I assure you that we will get to know the exhibit a little better after a few weeks. But right now, I will give you some broad overview of how we have created this exhibition. The exhibition is actually trying to be chronological, and it starts over here on this side with the earliest part having to do with the Chinese participation in the building of the U.S. Transcontinental Railroad. And we actually are very interested in that topic. We've had lectures here that were absolutely enlightening about how the Chinese survived during those very difficult times. And so here are some of the foods that they ate. The lecture that we had definitely was talking about the fact that the Chinese people ate better than the people who were not Chinese who were working on the exhibition. And so they were able to work harder and longer and have great results, but that also meant that they made enemies of the other people who did not have good nutrition, did not actually boil their water. Here the Chinese were boiling their water, and they were not so subject to things like dysentery. So they were smart. So it was very cool to hear that lecture. We can move on a little bit here. I hope you're seeing the banners. We chose some very interesting images of. We had to start with history, putting Chinese cuisine into its whole context, not just the Midwest, not just Chicago. It was impossible just to talk about Chicago, which is what we really thought we wanted to do because this is such a vast topic. How do you do this in one room? It's really only a little bit of touching here and there that we're able to do here, even with all the artifacts that we have assembled and all the beautiful banners and all of the wonderful panels that we have researched very carefully. So you'll probably need more time after I finish talking to look at the panels, but also we're going to come down in a little bit. There's more because the videos are quite interesting. I don't think I have time to go through each of the panels, but I can tell you that the time periods that we have are the very early days around the turn of the 20th century, where we were so lucky to have some of the descendants of the fanciest Chinese American restaurant in Chicago, King Joy Lo. So the artifacts that are in this case here and this case here, the table is not from King Joy Lo, but that's the kind of table they had. That's the blow up of the postcard from King Joy Lo. We have been very lucky to have all of this information. What amazes me about some of the artifacts from this very early era of opulence is how beautiful the dishware was back then, more than 100 years ago, with their name actually on the actual dishes. So can you imagine having a beautiful, fancy meal with those beautiful dishes?
Someone's names.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. The Chinese were not really allowed to work in many different areas. One was restaurants, one was laundries, and one was grocery stores, and that was mostly the three areas where the Chinese were allowed because of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and then again in 1892. So in order to be able to come to America, if you were a merchant and you could prove that you didn't work as a laborer, but you were like a manager or owner of a restaurant, then you could come to America. So what the Chinese did is they did that. Every year they changed the name of the person who was in charge of some of these restaurants so that they could bring their family members over. And that was legal. So that was kind of an interesting fact that we've learned over doing some of this research. So we'll move on a little bit to, you see these beautiful pictures here of some of the famous people. And we come here to Chin Foyne, who is the person who is responsible for King Joy Lo. And you will see that in his picture, he's the first one who doesn't have the Chinese queue because he actually wanted to assimilate. And that was important for his being accepted in America and in Chicago. And he actually was able to buy a house, which was almost impossible for Chinese people to buy homes because you had to have signatures of 2 white people if you wanted to buy something in order to buy property back then. So it was really very difficult, but he managed beautifully with several different really important restaurants. Another one was Mandarin Inn, that was his restaurant. But this is just really a lot of information I'm throwing at you, I'm afraid, but let's move on to the next era. So back in the 1940s and 60s is the next era, the mid-century, and we have some artifacts here from when the Polynesian and tiki bars took over Chicago right after World War II, when everybody got real interested in Asia all of a sudden. And so there were quite a few restaurants in Chinatown and in Chicago that offered this kind of cuisine. It was mostly Chinese Cantonese cuisine with some cute little glasses to have exotic drinks, that kind of thing. So we have some of that from our Chicago restaurants. If you would take a look at these banners for the restaurateurs here, the top one here is Alfred F. Chen from Jade Cafe. Here is our place setting from Jade Cafe, and we're going to have Philip talk about it since it's his family.
What you see on the table is a range of things chronologically, probably from about 1915 to 1930s. Believe it or not, there's an association of restaurantware collectors.
Yeah,
and they really geek out on details.
Yeah.
So you can look at the backside of a buffalo green stripe plate and decipher the codes and date them. None of the green stripe wares here date later than early to mid 30s. Everything here is from the Jade. The silver soldered plated wares, the compotes and so forth, they're earlier. And you'll notice that, well, you won't, because this is stamped Canton Tea Garden, not Jade Cafe. Now, when I give my presentation a little bit later, I'm going to show you my uncle, one of my uncle's work histories. And in his immigration records, he states that he worked at Canton Tea Garden from 1922 to 1925. So he was the hatchet man. You'll learn more about him tonight. He was a rascal. You know, his nickname in Chinese is he'll do anything on a dare. And he was the hatchet man for the Chen family in the Tong Wars. And my suspicion is that he ripped them off. I don't think he paid for them. I have a feeling he just removed them from Canton Tea Garden and gave them to the Jade Cafe. So these are the earliest. I can tell you that this stuff was put out of use by the time I started working at the restaurant when I was a child. This continued to be in use. Not with the dome, those were dispensed with, but my father continued to serve chow mein on the elevated platform. So there was something about chow mein in chop suey history that was glorified. And I'm making up a story, but you know, my father preserved that kind of status given to chow mein by serving chow mein only, exclusively on these. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. That's a barbershop tonic bottle. These are for hair tonics. They were adapted to soy sauce bottles. Early 20th century. The glasswares, I was told as a child that much of the glassware was purchased from Benny's Tavern, which was a couple of doors from the Jade Cafe. So what I surmise is that there was this collaboration or partnership amongst the restaurants and neighboring businesses, white businesses. I know Benny's Tavern is a white establishment, but they were friendly enough to kind of support one another. else? When I was a child, these had already been retired. But I'd always wanted to see how it looked in situ at circa 1930. So this is it. I think this is a very, very accurate representation of what John Dillinger, I'll talk about him later. He frequented the restaurant. This is very much what John Dillinger would have encountered eating at the Jade Cafe, and possibly even having sat in this chair. These are original chairs made by the National Chair Company of Chicago. The Smithsonian Institution has a full archive of National Chair Company trade catalogs.
Oh,
And I have a stock number for this chair. So when I'm in retirement, I'm going to go seek out the actual date of
Okay.
this chair. But I'm going to guess it's World War I era, something like that, because the JCafe opened in 1922-23, and I think these were the original chairs.
Are these two chairs, the panel was being designed by the owner?
No, I'll talk about that. There's a period of modernization that's important to chop suey restaurants. And my family went Art Deco rather than Qing Dynasty ornate carving and with inlaid tables. And what my uncle did, and you'll see his beautiful Art Deco restaurant. The interiors of it look like a Fred Astaire dance set. I'm not kidding, you'll agree. He took the Jade Cafe chairs, removed the backsplat, personally designed an Art Deco splat, and had craftsmen manufacture it and substitute for the old cafe chair style. Yeah, and you'll see them in the photos that I'll show you. And on the subject of modernization, because my family's businesses were in white neighborhoods, you know, kind of like Chin Fine, right? He buys a house in South Indiana,
it's
right? A white neighborhood.
yeah,
affluent
very white.
neighborhood.
Yes, yes.
My family did the same thing. They opened their Art Deco restaurants in white neighborhoods on Chicago's northwest side, getting away from Clark Street and Van Buren, getting away from, well, by 1912, things were happening here.
Right.
But they didn't have anything to do with this locale. They went up to West Irving Park Boulevard, and they eventually bought homes in those white neighborhoods. So this whole modernization thing, this kind of self-presentation being kind of pretty radically altered. You can see that here. I mean, this is a little dubious, stainless steel and bakelite. I have plated knives from the Jade of the period, but I deliberately put in the bakelite stainless steel to kind of get to the subject of this conversion to more acceptable modern tastes. It would have been in 1930. It would have been silver plate. You paid extra for bread. If you ordered bread, you get a butter pack. Original tablecloth. And touch. I said, okay, if they touch.
Sure.
Touch this. I mean, when you have a chance, feel this, because it's got a felt pad. And it was really important that it had that detail of cushioning. It's just a more enjoyable tactile experience, and it doesn't make a loud thud, like a hard loud thud, right? I mean, that's all. It's just, right? It's just really nicely considered.
How about the menu?
My father drew that. I know that because I know his handwriting, and he did this rote habitual thing where he drew pagodas. He drew pagodas and V-shaped birds in flight. And I told my students, no pagodas, no V-shaped birds in flight, because I teach drawing. And, but that's my dad's drawing. I don't know exactly when he did it. The sign dates to the 30s. It's possible he drew that later in the 30s. I mean, I'm looking at the cost of a Sunday dinner. Andrea,
I haven't had a chance to try and figure out
what do you think?
the
Late
date of
30s?
it. I would think I would think maybe a little later than that even,
40?
early 40s
I'm looking
maybe.
at chop suey. 1/4 chop suey, 65 cents. In 1930, well, see, this is takeout now. Like a platter of chop suey in 1934 shouldn't be more than 45 cents.
Well, it depends on the restaurant.
Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Like roughly 45, 50 cents.
Yeah,
This is 65 cents, so maybe this is maybe the drawing is 1940,
yeah,
but the sign had been in use.
yeah,
for
earlier,
years.
yeah, right.
Right. This was made by the Stuart Warner Company. Those of you who grew up here, remember that on Diversey? Yeah. The old, and now it's condos, luxury condos. This was manufactured in the old Stuart Warner building, and it was a prototype, and it was never patented, and it was never produced. So these are really rare. This is not a one-off, but it's almost like a patent model. Yeah.
And it does, and it still works.
It still works.
Yeah.
Where in the restaurant this place?
I never saw it in use. I found it high on a shelf in the kitchen. And it was so grimy, you couldn't read any of the orange grease paint. I'm not kidding, it was an opaque brown.
Whoa.
And so I got Q-tips and water, and over a period of weeks excavated the lettering and the drawing.
I guess maybe the price is just too low, they don't want to.
No, what happened was there's no on-off switch.
Oh.
There's no toggle switch. So the plastic plug-in got smashed, and they just retired it. Nobody took the time to replace the plug. And I was stunned when I replaced the plug and plugged it in that the original Neon 2, which is orange, lit up. Yeah. And I'm sorry you can't see it, but I'm so worried that the next time I plug it in, it'll just blow.
Well, we didn't want to happen on our watch.
I mean, yeah. At some point, it would be fun to plug it in for people.
Yeah, we have to take
Some other
the
event,
case off.
Take this off and plug it in and see it lit. Yeah. So that man up there is the one who, as a younger person, drew that miniature. And my uncle's farm lore hatchery. Do you want me to?
Do you want to?
That's something else. That's
We-
not
we-
restaurant related.
Yeah, well, we could just say, if you're interested, please look at the tag here, which has been transcribed that Philip had put attached to this hatchet from his uncle, who was part of the Tong Wars, and it's a very interesting story. And please read the tag, the label, when you have a chance after. But
It was talking about how gruesome some of that fighting was.
it had to
And
be,
there are
yeah.
some really gruesome stories
Yeah.
pertaining to my favorite uncle.
Yeah.
The things that he did. Really pretty awful. Yeah. And yet he's my favorite uncle.
Okay, he's a human being after all. Okay, well, maybe we'll move on now, if that's all right, Philip? Because just to give you I don't know if we want to change the schedule a little bit.
Yeah,
Just keep going, I'll try and move faster. This picture here is actually just one photograph that we were able to blow up from 1966 when the Cheyenne restaurant moved like one building down the street on Wentworth right here on the east side of Wentworth. And they had a brand new kitchen, which was wonderful. And here is Frank Wong, who is still alive today, and we interviewed him, and that's a segue into all these interviews that we interviewed about 14 different restaurateur families from the old-time restaurants, and we've just compiled just short clips from each of the 14 restaurants because we have, an hour and a half for each of the restaurants on videotape. So please, if you have a chance, come and watch a few of these very interesting clips that describe the experiences of the families, and it goes all the way up. Even we asked about the pandemic and how they've managed to survive during the pandemic. So there's some very interesting material on that. Half of the interviews are here and half are on the other side. So please, I hope you'll have a chance to look at that. Also over here, we wanted to have someone demonstrate how to cook in a wok. And so we got some people from the from Columbia College. Columbia College, yes, who were able to film two very important chefs, and I wrote it down so I get the names right. Okay, one is Tony Hu. I think that might be Tony right now from Lao Sichuan restaurant and the whole family of the Lao restaurants. And he's making dry chili chicken, which is his #1 bestseller. And also he's demonstrating mapo tofu and twice cooked pork. And then after him, then we went to Triple Crown, which is up here on Wentworth. And Chef Kim Chun-young made Mongolian chicken, which is one of his bestsellers, seafood noodles, steamed vegetable and pork buns, and hargao, one of the dim sums. So that's very interesting. This is the overhead view, and this is the side view. So have a look if you have a chance. We have quite a collection. We've been amassing a collection of menus and postcards, and we were very fortunate enough to get the collection of the man who actually printed a lot of the Chinese menus for Chicago. And so these are some of the stamps that he used in creating those menus. It's actually kind of interesting. And one of them, Judy Suhu, her family, which is King's Chop Suey, up in Argyle on the north side of Chicago. We have the menu from them. We have 2 stamps from them that are on the menu. So very, very cool, we thought. Very nice. So that's interesting and pretty rare. And let's move on a little bit here, if you don't mind. We are now up to, this is 1960s and 70s, where people started to branch out more, the Chinese, and they were doing not just Cantonese cooking anymore. There was, in addition to Cantonese cooking, they were also doing Mandarin and Sichuan and Hunan. They started doing that. But one of the more interesting things in here is this wonderful business plan from Ben Moy, who founded The Bird. And that was a very famous restaurant. And he, it was in, I'm trying to remember, number 4. He had restaurants in different places, including Skokie, Melrose Park, and Evanston. And the Bird was actually in Melrose Park, and that was very successful until someone drove the car into the kitchen. And then he had to close the restaurant at that point. And he actually was one of the first people to start a cooking school, Chinese cooking school. And that was really very exciting for people who got so excited they wanted to be able to cook it at home. So he was one of the first people to do that. And then behind that, there's also another person who had a cooking school just like a few years after that, which is the Oriental Food Market and Cooking School on Howard Street, just the very northern border of Chicago and Evanston. And so we have some of the recipes because one of the people we know definitely went to that cooking school, and she annotated what she was learning in cooking. So that's very exciting. Then we also have Ken Hom, and I don't know if I hope some of you have heard of him, a famous chef. He was born and raised in Chicago. And he was raised by a single mother, and his mother said, well, go make some money, go work in a restaurant. So he worked in King Wah restaurant to learn something from his uncle who was working there. He has become the most exceptionally well-known chef in almost the whole world, but certainly in the British Empire, the former British Empire. And he has received the Order of the OBE, the Order of the British Empire, and then just, I think this year, the commander, even higher, the commander of the British Empire. And he is one of the people that we interviewed via Zoom because he lives in London. So it was just so exciting. He gave us a copy of almost every one of his cookbooks, and he had cooking school, and he has a business to create, to sell woks. So, I mean, just a lovely, lovely human being. So that was very exciting for us to be able to meet him, even if it's by Zoom. Moving on, we have now the very modern era that we have here in this one case here. And this is you can see the dishware has changed remarkably since the early days, where you see you go from early to mid, now to very modern dishware. And then we have Bob Chin's Crab House, which is up in the northern suburbs. And his family has been going strong for a long, long time. I didn't even know it was a Chinese restaurant, but it is in its own way. It has just a lot of seafood, but it also has some Chinese dishes. And so that is paraphernalia that we were very lucky to get from his descendants, because Bob Chin died earlier this year, I think that was, yeah. So then we have two other restaurants here. The Triple Crown is one of the restaurants that is on over there in the cooking demonstration. And the other one here is Friendship Restaurant, which is very, very interesting restaurant, where the chef owner grew up where his father had a chop suey joint, and he said, you know, I think I can do better than that. I think I can do something more than that. And so he decided he'd go and get some education in French cooking. And so he has combined French and Chinese cooking to make wonderful, wonderful dishes. And he even has a Michelin recommendation, which is pretty rare for a Chinese restaurant to get a Michelin recommendation. So I recommend going here. And moving on here, this here is Tony Hu right now talking. I want to just sort of just talk a little bit about pandemic. And like I said, in the audios, the videos that we have up there, we always ask the restaurateurs how they survived. If you get, I'm not sure how much came out in the actual edited tape, but there's a bottle of beer down on the bottom there that is one of the reasons that Triple Crown survived, because they said during the era when you had to close a restaurant but you could only take out, he formulated a creative new kind of beer using jasmine tea, combining jasmine tea and beer. And it's delicious. It's very good beer. So that was one of the ways he was able to survive financially during the pandemic. So people have been very creative, I have to say that. We just have we wanted to have some different cookbooks and recipes that we thought were kind of visually interesting, and also something that might stimulate your appetite. So we've just done that very quickly to let you know that there's so many different cookbooks out there, and they're so interesting. So we also had restaurant suppliers as part of this exhibit. So this little bit here at the end that I'm talking about here are restaurant suppliers. You can see the kind of dishes that we have collected over the years from Chinese restaurants, and the different materials that they use to try and accomplish the cooking. You need a lot more than this. This is just the very tip of the iceberg here. And the very interesting thing I find about this one little placard here, there's 4 different styles of restaurant dishes that were available for sale. And so we have 3 of the 4 in our collection of that. And that was created by Bob Chin himself, this pattern here with the double happiness on it. So that's very cool.